So I released a thing, Mike.
You did. Tell us about your thing.
I had fun releasing this. Working with OmniFocus 3.0. Longtime followers of me know that I wrote a book about OmniFocus way back, 2016, early 2016, I believe. And then later in the year, I released my first ever video course on OmniFocus. And those actually are now for sale as well, obviously for lower prices by a long shot. But I released the new version, Mike, and it's apparently very popular, I'm learning, because people like it, which is exciting.
Sweet. Congratulations.
Yeah, the sad part about this is that, so I'm doing some introductory pricing on it, and by the time this episode releases, that will be done. So it will no longer be at introductory prices, but I thought about this ahead of time, Mike, and I set up a discount code for Bookworm listeners, which is, drumroll please, Bookworm.
All capitals?
It doesn't have to be all capitals,
okay,
but it could, whatever. Bookworm. So if you go to learn.joebulig.com and go to purchase the course, use the code Bookworm, and it'll get you back to the introductory pricing. So it'll take $5 off the course. So there you go. Working with OmniFocus 3.0. It is now live.
Very cool. Congratulations on launching this. I haven't gone through the whole thing, but I took a look at some of the videos that you had in there. And one of the things that stands out to me about this is it's not just the technical features or a system that you follow. You have a whole video on philosophy, for example.
Yeah.
So it's kind of understanding how the different pieces work and then allowing you to craft it and modify it to suit your needs, which is really one of the strengths of OmniFocus, but also one of the things that a lot of people probably never get to because it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I hope that it continues to do very well for you and looks great.
Yeah, no, thanks. Because that was the main point of this one is like the older version is all the nuts and bolts of how you click here, click there. This is how it works. Now, granted, it's on OmniFocus 2, the old one is. This one is high level. Like if you're looking for something that teaches you how to do like what is a project, what are the types of projects, go check out Max Sparky's field guide or check out my old course or go to Learn OmniFocus. Like go one of those places. This is not for you. This is high level. Like how do you go about building your architecture? So it's definitely on the upper horizon of things. So thus, philosophy. Anyway, there's that follow up from last week. You have a few action items here you got to follow up on, Mike. What you got? You using Headspace still?
I am, although I broke my streak because I forgot to meditate yesterday.
Mike.
My Duolingo streak is still going, however, and today actually is day 100.
Nice. Well done, sir.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I really like the meditation, the Duolingo. This is not a surprise to anybody who listens to this, probably, but these are all related in terms of me rethinking the intentionality behind my devices and trying to eliminate the time wasters or the unconscious moments of interaction with my technology. And this has been a very worthwhile experiment. Speaking to the meditation specifically, I don't think I've done this consistently enough to say like, oh yeah, every single day I'm experiencing a difference with this, but I know that it's coming. I'm kind of mad that I broke my streak yesterday, but it is something that I'm going to continue to keep doing. I do think this is going to stick, and I really enjoy it. It's just yesterday was nuts, so it fell through the cracks. Telling on myself.
So it was probably the day you really needed it.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, it's true. The next item on my follow up here, which is probably the fun one, is the create baseball cards for my family. Now I put a link in the document here. I'll copy this link right now and I'll paste this in the live chat. I don't think this is something I want to release as part of the show notes yet because this isn't finished. Okay. This is kind of a concept and I'll walk you through what I did here. I just made this quickly in OmniGraffle and this is for me, but this is what I think the format of the card is going to look like. I obviously want to make it a lot prettier. I want to go into probably numbers and create like a table and on a 0 to 10 scale, recreate these Colby scores so they look a lot better than they do right now. But I do want to have my Colby results here. I want to have my top 5 StrengthsFinders results here. You remember that exercise where I sent you that email and I asked you basically what you considered my strengths?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I did that to a bunch of people. That's part of the unique ability book that I was going through, and I dug that stuff up. And the exercise is you send that to a bunch of people who know you pretty well, and then you synthesize all their responses down into like your top 5 unique abilities. And so that's what that next section is. And then the other piece for me, just something that I want to be looking at all the time, and it seemed to make sense on a baseball card, is my life verse. So this is a Bible passage. I have Psalm 112 on here because that's the one that really means a lot to me. And so that's all on the back of this baseball card, or will be on the back of a baseball card. And I want to do something similar for everyone in my family. Not everybody has taken the Colby. Not everybody has done the StrengthsFinder. Everybody does have their own verse in our family, so that piece is already there. And we've also got something downstairs in our basement with all the different like character traits. So not everybody has gone through the unique ability thing that I have on mine, but we basically have like a list of the positive traits that we see in our kids written down. And so those are the types of things that I would put on their cards instead of their unique ability.
Sure. So the card that you shared the link to, that's yours?
This is mine.
That's a card for you? Okay.
And again, this was
I wasn't sure if it was you or the kids.
Yeah, this is me. Just based on some of the things that I had already done, all of this stuff exists for me already. So I was kind of playing around with the different elements and what might I want to be on here. Since I had these things, these were kind of my building blocks or my Lego as I snapped these together and tried to create a format that I liked. Then once I have that, and I think I'm pretty close to that. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of formatting that's done to this. I want to make it a lot cleaner, a lot prettier, but this is basically what they'll look like, I think.
Sure. Well, it's kind of a cool concept. I would share it. Make it public. Come on, Mike. You could do it.
Okay. The other action item I had here, which is the hard one, is embrace radical truth and radical transparency however I can. I feel like I'm trying to do this. It's kind of interesting because there's not a whole lot of places that you can do this. I'm finding you have to kind of tiptoe a little bit and kind of feel things out before you really dive in with radical truth and radical transparency. I do think that you can, like for your family, embrace these and kind of set the tone for we're going to always share what we're thinking and we're always going to share what's true. But there's a lot of other scenarios where just because I recognize the value of this doesn't mean I just get to spout off whatever I'm thinking. So this one requires some discretion, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, because it's one of those that you have to build up. You have to build up a lot of integrity with honesty and a close relationship of trust with another person before you can do this.
That's what I was going to say. There really needs to be a solid foundation of trust before you can really do this.
Right.
And there are some places where I can do that, but there are some places where I'd like to do that and I can't yet.
Sure. Yeah, because bad things could happen if you start just, here's everything I've got going on and here's everything I think about your business. Okay, I'm never talking to you again about this.
Yeah, just because it's true doesn't necessarily mean it's helpful.
Right, for sure. Well, I've got one action item to follow up on, systematizing my business decisions. This starts with data collection, at least in the way that I intend this action item, which I have started. I don't know that there's an easy way to follow up on this one, Mike, because it's going to be something that's going to have to take some time. It's going to be a longer term process of developing that system. But it has a lot to do with data and funnels and how do you go here versus there. Sometimes I see like sales funnels and stuff, and I get a little squeamish because it tends to take some of the personal touches out of those conversations. I don't want to do that. So trying to figure out how to do that on a larger scale is what I'm intending there. So we'll see how it pans out in the long term. I do have a lot of those systems in place for working with OmniFocus to build that in the long term as well. So yes, I've started that road. Not really anything I can technically share on that quite yet, because I have not embraced Mike's action item of radical transparency, apparently. So that's not something I do intend to do, but I will likely share a lot of tips and tricks of what I learn along the way, just because I have a tendency to do that. So yes, I think that's it for action items, which brings us to today's book, which is You Are Awesome by Neil Pasricha, who has written 2 other books, The Book of Awesome and The Happiness Equation. Just want to point out again, we mentioned this last time, but we're going through advanced readers editions that were sent to us by Neil and his team. So if you see some of the promo stuff we'll have for pictures for this, you'll notice the cover on it looks slightly different, namely a big black dot on it. So there's that. But I want to point that out because these books were given to us. We were not given any form of, we would like you to say, there was none of that. So we're allowed to say whatever we want about these books. And I'm glad that we get to do that because I really enjoyed this. This was an awesome read. So I'm looking forward to getting into this one. But yes, You Are Awesome by Neil Pasricha. He's a New York Times million-copy best-selling author. Tagline on this one is 9 secrets to getting stronger and living an intentional life. My tongue will work. It was a great read. I really liked going through this, but he shares these 9 secrets. We'll go through each one of them. But what were your first impressions on this, Mike?
This was not the normal type of book that we cover, I feel like is the best way to describe it. It was kind of the anti-principles.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad thing, even though we both rated Principles 5.0. It's a very different and I would say entertaining, very feels like you're being told a story, as opposed to Principles is like, forget all the personal stuff. Here's the facts. Here's the systems and the machines that are working behind the scenes.
Right.
This was more of an emotional read. Neil's got a crazy story. The whole launch pad for his career and his books was this blog that he started after his marriage fell apart and his best friend took his own life. And that is 1000 Awesome Things, 1000awesomethings.com. And he just decided that things are going terrible, but I'm going to find the things that are good, and started blogging about the things that were awesome. And these posts on this website are great.
Yes.
Like one of them from November 19th, number 370, is backing your car into the driveway. There's a picture of a car like facing the street. And then the whole post says, and driving it right out. Awesome! Exclamation point.
Yep.
So that kind of gives you
the little things,
little taste of what this book is all about. There's not a lot of I don't know how to say this without it sounding kind of bad, but like there's not a lot of meat to this book compared to Principles. Like Principles, you kind of have to read it probably 5 times in order to digest the gist of it. This one is a lot easier to sit down and read because he's telling you his story. And so after you read it, the real impact is in the story that he tells and kind of the attitude that you feel towards your own situation and recognizing that you have the ability to kind of change that. But it's not a bunch of lists of things and like 1,000 different things that you're going to need to remember and apply at different points in your life, which is exactly what Principles felt like.
Sure.
So all that to say, it's very, very different, but it's very, very good. And it also, I think, makes it a lot more accessible and something that just anybody could sit down and enjoy.
Yeah, because when we went through Principles, we kind of came away from that with the idea that you have to be in a certain place in order to read that. And it's kind of heady, takes a lot to figure out how you're going to apply it. This is not that. This is something I think is approachable by pretty much anybody.
That what you just said, I think that's the best way to encapsulate this, is that Principles felt very heady. This feels very emotional.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So this is one that, it's ultimately about building resilience and how to live intentionally. He comes at it from the stance of you have bad things happen to you or you feel like you just can't win, which is nice timing because I've had a lot of those thoughts lately between health and other things. Like it just, I always tend to feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. So it's kind of nice to go through this at this point, even though, I have had some successes with some things. But let's jump into some of these secrets that he spells out. And I do want to preface this with, I'm not sure that I would have called these secrets as much as just these are things to consider when you're going through difficult times.
Sure.
At the same time, I completely understand the marketing and the publicity aspect of saying these are secrets. So I would probably agree to do the exact same thing if I were him. So, but on first blush, it's like, why are you calling it secrets? Why not call it principles? But that was in my head because we just finished principles. So
I had the same thought.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, that's just merely, happenstance of when these things crossed my mind. So let's step into secret number 1, which is add a ... Now, what he's getting at here when he says add a ... let's say something terrible happened. Your car gets rear-ended, or let's say you rear-end somebody else. It's easy in that scenario to start having thoughts along the lines of, I'm a terrible driver. Bad things always happen to me. You can start to have these thoughts. His point here is that you can say things like, I'm a bad driver, but always make sure you put a ... at the end of that statement to allow yourself to grow past that point. It's not a matter of I'm a bad driver. It's I'm a bad driver for now. Like, you can put the little clarifier on there that allows you to step past that particular aspect. But that's important because it keeps your mind open to the growth piece. And I could not help, Mike, but think of Carol Dweck and mindset whenever I was going through this, because it's all about thinking about being able to grow beyond what you're currently going through. But that's the main point in chapter 1 here secret 1 of adding that ... to your story. Whatever it is you're telling yourself, making sure that you're not focusing on that, but being willing to see it as, an extension of that story that you're referring to in your own mind.
Yeah, the main point is that something bad happens, and we tend to view that as the end of the story. And he says in this first chapter that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to keep going. But that's also the only way that things ever change. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Like you don't decide that, oh, this is terrible, I guess I'm just going to stay here for the rest of my life.
Yep.
But that's what you feel like doing whenever that happens. You just want an escape. But that's not the way life works. My pastor has a different way of saying this, which I like, and I think it fits with this whole idea of your life as a story. He says all the time, turn the page. So the period, his main point, the ... he's saying replace the period at the end of your sentence. The ... indicates that there's more to be said. There's something coming after this, adding yet to the end of the sentence, essentially. And that's hard for us to do because we get so focused on the result, and we see the result and we apply that result through a fixed mindset lens, going back to your point about Carol Dweck, and we say, I am a failure, rather than saying I failed, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to go try something else. And eventually I'm going to find the thing and everything's going to turn out okay in the end. But in order for that to happen, we have to keep going. I think this is one of the most powerful things that you can do, is just simply never, ever, ever, ever give up. And again, this is way easier to talk about than to actually practice. I get that. Just keep going, step by step. My pastor's another saying, day by day, play by play. Just focus on the next thing that's in front of you and don't stop. If that's all people got out of this book, it probably is enough to radically change a lot of people's lives.
Sure.
Because we tend to go by how we feel or what we see, the circumstances around us, and we let that dictate our action. We feel like we're helpless and there's nothing that we can do. But we can choose to keep going. And just that simple choice of continuing to put one foot in front of the other and see what tomorrow brings, that's enough to transform your situation, because this isn't going to last forever. This too shall pass. And if you don't just stop and set up shop in the valley of despair, then eventually you're going to get to the other side. And I think it's really sad how many people never get there. That's the one thing that really stood out to me from this book, was the very beginning when he's telling his story and all the reasons that he had to just pack it up. I'm done. Like, life, you've been cruel to me. I'm not going to try anymore. But he didn't. And as a result, how many people have been impacted by the books that he's written, the blog that he started, the TED Talks that he's given, even though if you think about everything that had happened to him at that point, and you're trying to like crunch all the numbers, look at everything logically, no one would have blamed him if he would have just said, that's enough. I'm just going to go get a normal job, just put in my time, do my thing, and not try for something awesome anymore.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a good transition into the second secret, because you really have to see the bigger picture. So the second secret is shift the spotlight. And what he means by that is we have a tendency to think things revolve around us. And we tend to think that if we're doing something wrong, everyone around us sees it. Everyone around us is focusing on it. If my hair's out of place, everyone there noticed. If I screwed up a line, everyone saw it. You get the point. We have a tendency to think that way. I see this on Sunday morning quite a bit. We have a very high standard of, I don't want to say production, but it's mostly we want to make sure that mistakes in sound and quality and the way the worship runs, we want to make sure that those mistakes don't detract from the worship experience. And that's always been our intention. But if a mistake happens, I notice it every single time. I see every single thing, like when the lyrics came up slightly too slow, when there was a hair of feedback getting ready to come through on a specific microphone. I noticed that. And I think everyone saw it, and everyone saw that there was that potential mistake. I talked to people afterwards. Oh, it was great. It went really well. What? Like, there were these 7 things that went wrong. How could you not? They don't see that. So his point here is that when you shift the spotlight, you have to start realizing that those mistakes or those little pieces that you see or that you do don't necessarily revolve, like not everyone sees those. So shift the spotlight off of yourself, broaden it out so you can see the broader picture of what's going on, because you're just one piece in the broader puzzle that's going on there. So don't focus in on yourself like I tend to do, it seems, every time I run sound.
Yeah, and I think the really powerful application of this for a lot of people maybe is a little bit more personal. So it's not on I'm in charge of the lights or the sound for a large corporate event, but just the fact that I am somewhere where there are 1,000 other people. I think, based on the spotlight effect, that everybody is looking at me and really nobody's looking at you.
Right.
So don't worry about it so much. One thing that was really interesting to me from this section, we have these 2 different extremes typically in the productivity space specifically. I think talks about how we hear inspirational messages like just do it or follow your heart. And then when you can't do something or you recognize you're not good at something, then you feel stuck. And at that point, you've got a crossroads, because if you quit, that's a problem. And if you stick with it, that's also a problem because you're still stuck.
Yep.
And so he makes the point that as a result, this self-help industry can actually be pretty toxic and offer a surprising amount of contradictory advice. And I think this is totally true. This is my main issue with the systems, I think, because the people who write a book about a system, they 100% believe that this is the thing that will help people get unstuck, because this is the thing maybe that got them unstuck. And I'm not even arguing that they shouldn't write that book. If this is the thing that really impacted them, then absolutely they should share that idea with the world. I just don't like to take a system like that and assume that if I follow this system to the T, that it is 100% going to work every time. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about You Are Awesome, is there is no system here. He's basically saying in this section that all of the advice that you hear is going to be appropriate in a certain context, but when you try to consider all of it and then you add in an element of being stuck where you are, you're going to quickly get to the point where this is all meaningless.
Right.
And that's something I think people need to recognize. And if this book helps you realize that, then that's great. I think I've kind of had my moment of clarity on this prior to reading this, but that whole passage there, I thought that was articulated really, really well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that like whenever you're referring to like the productivity space and how, it's sometimes counterintuitive with what we see and what we refer to with that. But I think there's starting to become a bit of a shift. He obviously doesn't like the systems, but I did see, I recently did a workflow webinar on learnomnifocus.com, which was a lot of fun, but I got a lot of questions after that with people seeing my whole system that I demo and show off in the course. And I used the real system for that. But a lot of the questions I got around it were, how do you nail down what it is you should do in each moment? Like that's what those questions revolved around. It's like, how do you use due dates? How do you make sure that you know exactly what to do? Because I use one big list, and you don't get a systematized way of working through things with one big list. You just don't. And that was the intent, is, it allows me to step aside, let me use my intuition, use judgment calls throughout the day. That's the intent there, because systems are great and they can also be detrimental. Like, I think he would agree with that, and that we tend to see that in a lot of the self-help world.
Yeah, and then kind of compounded with that in the same chapter is, if you share how you've messed up, it can motivate others. It's contagious in a good way. Because if you look at the systems that are out there, this is people sharing what has worked for them. And again, I'm not arguing that they should not share that. But if all anybody ever shares is the things that are going well, and no one shares the mistakes that they've made or the struggles that they've had to go through, then when you go through something challenging, you think to yourself, well, I must be doing it wrong because no one else that I look up to is facing this kind of stuff. But the truth is that they all are.
Yes.
So that's one of my action items, is to share more of my failures. And I know that's not the first time I've had that one, but it's a good reminder to me to not just share the stuff that looks good on the outside. The stuff that's really going to help people may be the things that I'm struggling with.
Thus, bookworm. Go bookworm. All right, so secrets 1 and 2, add a ... shift the spotlight. Secret number 3, see it as a step. All right, now think about something bad that has happened. Car breaks down, or you have a failed website. You have something bad happen. Okay, see that failure, that bad thing, as a step in the right direction or towards something better. The example here is that in Neil's case, he had, I think it was 5 or 6 websites that were complete failures. And then he started the blog, 1,000 Awesome Things. He started that blog because he got tired of all his failures. He wanted to look for things that are awesome, thus backing your car into the driveway. So he started that because he was sick and tired of failing, and that became a step in the right direction that has then led to 3 books and all kinds of great things that have happened to him as a result of that. So whenever you look at this, see whatever your failure is as a step. So he saw all those failures as a step in the right direction. And the analogy here is that think of it as an invisible staircase. Now, when you're taking these steps, generally on a staircase, you know which steps come next. You know if it curves to the left or right. You know if it goes straight up. if there's a landing. Like, you can see all of that ahead of time on a normal staircase. But imagine that's invisible. Now, most of the time, if you ask somebody if they know what the next 5 or 10 years holds for them, they say, yeah, they're pretty confident. Is much going to change? No. My life's going to be pretty much the way it is right now.
Liars.
Yep, exactly. Like, that's what people will tell you. But almost 100% of the time, that's not true. Things happen. Difficult challenges come along. You have to make edits to the way that you operate in your life because you don't know what those next steps are. You cannot tell what step 3 is when you're not even through step 1. All you can see is the next step, which is right in front of you. That's his point. So whenever a bad thing happens, you have to be able to see that as a step and think of it as a positive step because you don't know what's coming next. That's his whole point here.
Yeah, and then kind of coupled with that is the fact that we think the way things are is going to be based on the way things were, or maybe rephrasing that, the way things will be in the future is based on what we've experienced so far. So we project our current experience forward. And that's the whole idea of the invisible staircase is you can't see where the top of it is. You don't have a clear path forward. To your point, you just have the next step. And kind of coupled with that is the general idea of failure as a bad thing, because we look back at all the times that we've failed and we see maybe the negative consequences that came from it, or we remember how that made us feel. And then we project forward that, well, I'm going to avoid that if I can. But as he talks about in a later chapter, that's really the thing that's going to ultimately allow you to be successful. So we need to challenge some of those traditional ideas about moving towards our ideal future, because we assume that we can see up the invisible staircase, but we can't. And then there's another key piece to this, which is a minor point that he makes, but I really think is worth calling out here, is that all news is negative. I 100% agree with this. I've stopped following the news now for probably a couple of years.
For sure.
And it's kind of interesting to me because my parents are older, obviously. They still very much are connected with the news, the evening news specifically. That's how they find out about what's going on in the world. And then when we see them for dinner or whatever, they want to talk about world events. Like, did you hear about this? And I'm like, no, I didn't. Every time I have to say that, I feel good.
Oops, sorry. Didn't keep tabs.
No, I don't. And I don't really care. Because every single, regardless of which way you lean politically, every single news outlet, they make their money off of bad news. So there is going to be plenty of bad news. And if you add up all of the psychological effects that has on you, it's very easy to see how that can very much be contradictory towards progress in your quest for awesome. But it's also the kind of thing that makes us keep coming back. It's kind of habit forming. It's addictive. So I don't know. It's hard sometimes to break free from some of that stuff, but he makes the point, and I 100% agree with this, that if you really want to be positive, if you want to live an awesome life, you need to remove as much negative as you can, and removing the news as a source of information probably going to have less of a negative impact than you think, and might have a much greater positive impact than you think.
So we're recording this on a Friday, and on this coming Monday morning, it will be exactly 1 year at that moment. It'll be exactly 1 year since the last time I watched the news. And I watched the morning news, and I know this because we were in a hotel on our way towards my mom's place for Thanksgiving, which, is coming up next week. So we do that trip every year. And that particular morning, when we got up to the hotel, we went and grabbed breakfast, and I had the girls with me. And someone in the room, of course, had the TV on, because hotels are incapable of having a breakfast area without 1 or 12 TVs on and blaring. So there was a TV in the corner. They had the news playing, and I watched it for a few minutes, and it totally wrecked my day. Just totally, because, everything's inflammatory. Everybody's mad. It's all negative. Like, why is this even on?
Airports, too.
Oh, yeah, they're terrible, too.
And I think in airports, like everywhere you look, there's news. And it's probably just because people are killing time. But next time you go through an airport, just people watch and look at who's watching the news and look at their facial expressions and whether they look happy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know that, we sat there in the breakfast area, and one of the guys that I could tell who was intently watching the news got up and left. And there were two other families there that I could see were not paying any attention to the TV. And I just asked them, can I turn that off? And they looked at me like, oh, I suppose that is an option. We can turn that off. And they're like, yeah, by all means. So I went over, and I couldn't find the power button on the thing, and there was no remote to be found.
So you ripped it out of the wall and threw it in the pool.
I totally ripped the thing out of the wall. I was like, no. I will shut this thing off. So I pulled the power cord on the thing, and we're shutting this off. And the rest of breakfast was peaceful. And the part that was funny to me was that before that TV was turned off, each table in the room was kind of in their own little world. Like we were all contained, like we were talking amongst ourselves as a family. When I broke that, invisible wall between us and the other two families there and killed the TV, for whatever reason, that broke the ice, and we were able to have conversations. So we had conversations with those two other families, found out that they normally go back to the same hotel at the same time of year. It's like, well, I might see you next year then. So we'll see. We exchanged numbers and stuff. It was kind of a fun little ordeal, but I still very, very explicitly remember the news that day. And it wasn't even anything, massive. It was just something local, and they blew it out of proportion because they were looking for viewership. So, no news. Get rid of it.
So let me share my own story with this, and kind of an annoyance about this. So I mentioned my parents like to watch the news. They like to talk to us about the things that are happening. We also have a lot of young kids. So they'll be talking about something, and they'll ask us, did you hear about the guy who got murdered? And my kids hear everything. They're like, wait, what?
Right.
And then they try to, never mind. Because it's because they shouldn't.
Now they want to know.
But they have no problem with us hearing it. We have an opinion and a preference here too. We would prefer not to hear this stuff, but that just doesn't even register as an option a lot of times, And I'm use this as an example. It's really not that big a deal. Okay. I am not, I have a very good relationship with my parents. Okay. But I use this as an example that it just becomes so ingrained in the normal day to day, but you don't have to settle for just going with the flow and chatting at the water cooler about all the negative stuff that's happening. You can set intention and change your course.
Or tell yourself a different story.
Oh, nice segue.
Bing, I win. All right, secret number 4, tell yourself a different story, because that was awesome, because, you are awesome. So tell yourself a different story. When bad things happen, typically we see only the negatives. I don't have the body I want. I see only the bad things about the way I look. My wardrobe isn't the way I like. My boss doesn't like me. All these things are negatives, and we tell ourselves all the negative stories, like what the news tells us. And I think this is maybe one of the most difficult secrets here, Mike, because telling yourself the opposite of that and then believing that is so incredibly difficult, but I could see where it's super valuable. If you see that your boss doesn't like you and he's making things hard on you, see it as, hey, this is a chance to get better at character. See it as a chance to figure out how to deal with difficult people. See the positive side of that. Now, maybe that's a bad example. I don't know. But you get the idea here is whenever you have something negative, the way you view it is all in your head. It's not a matter of what's happening in the world. Maybe this is a stoic pull. Don't necessarily react to things the way that everyone else does. Think about it and then choose the way that you're going to react. That concept, really cool concept. That is so hard to do. Like I tried to figure out ways that I could do this from the time I finished reading that section to now, and there have been a few points when I could try to implement this, and I have been very unsuccessful in trying to accomplish this. That's why I say I think this is the most difficult one, and I have no action items around this because I don't really want to try this. But it's one that I think could be valuable. It's just one that I think is super difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing that I jotted down here was the 3 big questions. And I think this helps clarify how important the story that you are telling yourself at the moment really is. So number 1, will this matter on my deathbed? Number 2, can I do something about this? Number 3, is this a story that I'm telling myself? That last one in particular is pretty powerful, I think. He makes the point in this chapter that many of us impart shame to ourselves, which he defines shame as the belief that others are making a judgment of you. Well, others may not be making a judgment of you, but you're saying something that is making you ashamed of maybe something that you've done, and then you say that enough and you assume the identity, and now it's not that you're experiencing shame about something that you've done, but you're experiencing shame about something that you are. And again, no one needs to project this onto you. We do a great job of this ourselves. And the reason I think that this happens is that we tend to connect dots. We look at the outcomes and we say, well, that was a success or that was a failure. And then we ascribe a value judgment to the thing as either good or bad. And we kind of already talked about how we tend to ascribe failures as something that is bad, but that's not necessarily the case. And especially for people who are very logical, like I think both you and I are, we'll look at the facts. And there's a statement in this chapter that really struck me. He said that a fact is different than a story. And I think we've talked about this previously in Bookworm 2, where you can have facts, you can have individual things that are true, but the way that you connect them is not necessarily true. So you can look at a fact that you failed at this thing, that thing, and then tell yourself a story that I am a failure as a fill in the blank, and I'm not going to try this anymore. But that's not necessarily true. So the whole point of this chapter, this section, is when you find that you're telling yourself that sort of story, hit pause, evaluate maybe why you're telling that story the way it is, and then try to spin it, for lack of a better term. Find a different angle to interpret the facts that are before you. And I don't have an action item associated with this either, but I recognize that this is something that I'm not necessarily great at, and it's something that I'd like to become better at.
Right.
So not an action item again, but I also want to start telling myself different stories. And when I find myself connecting the dots based on the facts that are presented, asking myself specifically, is there another way to look at these things?
I just think this is hard. I still think it's hard, but I get the value of it. So
it is. And I think really the awareness of the fact that there is another option, that's really the valuable thing at this point.
Oh, sure.
You know, for someone who is just picking up this book and reading this. And again, we've read a bunch of these books. So a lot of this stuff we've heard in some way, shape, or form before. But assuming you're brand new to this may be completely revolutionary to some people. First time you've ever heard the fact that you don't have to just assume that because A equals B and B equals C, that A equals C. There's a different way to connect those dots. That can be life-changing.
For sure. I mean, the obstacle is the way. Ryan Holiday. Go back in time. What was that? Episode 3, 4, something like that. You know, that's a lot of what it's about, is seeing things with a different lens when it's not exactly pleasant.
Yep.
So that's a good place to go for it. All right. Secret number 5, lose more to win more. This is basically fail fast, if you want a summarization of that. The idea is the more times you play the game, the more likely you are to accrue wins. He brings out some baseball stats, like folks who had the most wins in their repertoire played the most games. That's just a simple fact. The more times people try to do something, the more likely you are to have some successes, which means that you have to be willing to accept a large number of failures as well. This is Seth Godin's story. He tells about how he had a lot of failures before he has had successes. Einstein was the same way. All kinds of folks in history who talk about all the failures they had. But those things teach you, and those failures allow you to continue to get better at things. So I of course, working in software and in tech, you deal with failures all the time, and you always learn from those and move on. But the key that I found in this is being willing to step up to the plate and try. Just be willing to lose or fail at something with the hope that you will succeed at it.
Yeah, this chapter, I totally get his point, but I also think that the fact that you fail a lot doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to succeed. So, how do I say this? A lot of failure does not produce a lot of success, but you can't get a lot of success without a lot of failure. Does that make sense?
It does, but you have to keep in mind that he predicated this with some secrets that, add a ... Yes, you failed, but now what? Shift the spotlight off your failure onto the broader picture. See that failure as a step. Tell yourself a different story about it. He gives you all of those before he gets to this point. So I don't disagree with you, but if you're doing those 4 things and you're willing to learn from those failures, I think eventually the answer is yes, you will eventually succeed.
Yes.
I think that's what he's getting at.
I agree with you. For the person who just jumped straight to chapter 5, you maybe don't get that context.
For sure.
And I guess really that's the thing I want to call out here, is that you have to take this in context. And if you just read chapter 5, I think you're maybe missing some key ideas here. We kind of talked about the growth mindset. That really is the key, is what happens when you fail. So the number of failures doesn't really matter, but if after every failure you look at why you ended up here and you make some changes and you try something different, then that is going to eventually lead you to success. But the fact that you failed isn't a predicator of that success. He uses some sports examples. I think he talked about Cy Young, but the one that really stood out to me, because I'm in Wisconsin, Brett Favre with the Green Bay Packers.
Nobody likes Brett.
Because he's a very likable guy. He's just total chill.
I can't get too upset because he played for the Vikings for a while. So,
but growing up, he was the quarterback, and it was maddening to watch him because he had people described it as a gunslinger mentality. So he would just try for all these ridiculous throws, and for a while, he had the record for the most touchdowns in a career and also the most interceptions, and people were quick to point that out. Neil would say that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think when people share those statistics, they kind of think that it's a bad thing. I don't necessarily think that. I think those two are kind of related. And the fact that he threw so many touchdowns was based on the fact that he was willing to take some chances. But also, you could get the feeling that watching somebody like Brett Favre, which is kind of my point about how you can't just fail a bunch of times, you have to learn from your mistakes. Sometimes Brett would just, throw stuff, and he would have games where he'd have 5-6 interceptions, and you're just like, stop doing that, right? Because
you're just killing me. Smalls.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the mentality that as I apply this, want to do a little bit differently than something like that. And I want to call it out to everybody else too, is you can't just have a gunslinger mentality. You have to have a growth mindset applied to this in order for this to really work. And
sure,
it's hard to think of a specific scenario where I could draw an example of that from. But I do think that the real value here is really just recognizing that the fact that you failed is not necessarily bad. Failure is not final. But where do you go from here? And the answer should never be backwards. It should always be forwards.
For sure. For sure. No, I totally get the whole like fail fast concept. I get it, but it's not one that I think you should, how do I say that? It's not one that you should count on or just like, oh, that one's not going to work. Let me try again. Oh, that one's not going to work. Let me try again.
Exactly.
If you come at it with that mentality, you may have a very long string of failures.
You may never win.
Yeah, it's possible those successes never come. It's only when you're willing to take what worked and what didn't work from those previous failures and applying them to your next attempt. Like when you get to that point, I think that's where the potential can come in.
Yeah, everybody likes to throw out the statistic that Thomas Edison had 10,000 failures before he invented the light bulb. But maybe you don't have enough time to make 10,000 more failures in your life. What do you do then? You got to fail smarter. You can't just try a bunch of random stuff.
Yes. You've got a note here about 3 ways to accelerate success. Failure.
Yeah.
You want to cover that quick?
Sure. This is kind of related. So he had 3 things here, which I think are genius and worth calling out for how to fail correctly. Number 1, he said,
Sure.
Go to parties where you don't know anyone. This made the introvert in me very nervous, but I recognize that this is
scared.
This is
terrified.
very correct. Because I've seen this happen. Like I've seen this apply in my life before, where I've been somewhere where I don't know anybody, and I force myself outside my comfort zone, and that's usually when cool stuff happens. So getting outside of your little, out of your world of experience and experiencing something else can give you more dots to connect and help you see a bigger picture. Number 2 is have a failure budget. This also is genius and really addresses my main point with you can't just keep failing. A failure budget ensures that you're going to cap your losses at a certain amount. And this could be a time budget. It could be a dollar budget. He used this when he was making his websites because 1,000 Awesome Things was his 6th website. He would say, I'm going to spend up to $100 on this thing, and then it's got to show me something before I invest more in it. I think that's really smart. And then number 3, count your losses. So again, don't just keep failing. Recognize the fact that you have failed. Don't just get it out of your mind as quick as you can, because that's another thing that people say all the time is like, you got to have a short memory. Well, yeah, that's true, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to remember that the thing happened. It depends how you look back at it. If it causes you to be fearful of trying again or going forward, then that's a bad thing. But recognizing that I tried this way before and it didn't work, so this time I'm going to try something else, that's a very positive thing.
Absolutely. So yes, I'm with you. The first of those 3. Do I have to? Yeah, I get it. But I think the main
I was
takeaway,
literally at a large group gathering the other day, and somebody was like, do you like getting together with people like this? And I mentioned your T-shirt, and I'm like, no,
yes.
My buddy's got a T-shirt, and I think I need to get one. No, Introverts unite separately in your own homes. That's my idea of a good time.
Yes. I think we can get a link to that picture in the show notes because I think it's on my Instagram.
Awesome.
If you scroll back on it. But yes, I've had more than a couple people tell me they want that shirt. I do wear that shirt in public, by the way. And because it's one of those shirts, like it's really cool shirt, but you really got to think about the group you're going to when you wear that.
Yeah,
like,
I saw another one the other day that said, I'm sorry I can't talk to you. I spoke to 2 people yesterday.
Yes, absolutely. Kind of piggybacking off of that, though, secret number 6, reveal to heal. It's exactly what it sounds like. If you're going to heal from the failure or the difficulty that you dealt with, you have to be willing to talk about it. And you have to be willing to reveal it to other people. This is why I was talking about Mike sharing his baseball card publicly, because revealing those personal things help you grow and help you get over some of the difficulties that you've dealt with to get there. This is also why the course we were talking about earlier, working with OmniFocus, the third version, when I recorded that, and Mike, this will make you squirm. When I recorded that, I did not use a guest account on my computer, and I did not set up a demo database for that particular screencast.
Yeah,
which means
I remember you kept your original database in the first program, and that was one of the things people really liked about it.
Yeah.
So I kind of assumed you would do that again with this one. But yeah, you're right. That's not something people would typically do.
No, and it terrifies the people who record whenever you do that. But if you want to see what I actually run in my OmniFocus setup, that's the way to do it. And this is partially why, because I have learned that if I'm going to share my real system, and I think I actually managed to do it without blurring anything out too, I managed to go through that whole system, because in my mind, whenever I watch other people's courses and watch other people's systems and screencasts, yes, they use demo data and they tend to make it funny, and like they'll use Star Wars references and stuff, and like, build the new Millennium Falcon. Like they'll do some stuff like that in order to make it fun. But it's hard to get a read on how real that is and like how to translate it, because there is that level of translation you have to do. You don't have to do that with this. So I have found a lot of value in revealing the real thing, because to me it makes it easier to learn on my own system as well. Like I always tend to, when I record those, I find things and I tweak and adjust my own system, usually right after that, sometimes in the middle of. So that does happen. There was one point he called out, one task of sorts that I have as an action item out of this section, and that's what he calls the 2-minute morning practice. It's 3 prompts. So this would be like, I guess you would call this a morning journaling process.
Yeah.
It's a way of revealing things to yourself. I've never really done something like this. I'm not one that typically uses prompts with journaling. No idea why that is. That's maybe something I should explore. But this sounded interesting, and I'm willing to try this. So the 2-minute morning practice, there's 3 prompts here. I will let go of, fill in the blank. I am grateful for. I will focus on. So what you're doing is, what is the thing that you have in your mind that you haven't let go of yet, that you're still, bottled up inside, not willing to move past? What are you grateful for? What's something that has happened that you're super grateful has happened to you? And what is the thing you're going to focus on for that day? It seems like it'd be a great way to jumpstart things. Now, granted, I read about this about 5 or 6 days ago as we're recording, and I haven't done it yet. Maybe that's a bad sign. But the goal is to do this. So I'm making this an action item. Maybe I'll actually follow through now that I'm making it public. So yes, that is one that I'm willing to try out. But I think on your part, Mike, I think you need to share your baseball card.
Okay, I will.
Not to pressure you into it. You can say no. It's okay.
No, I don't mind sharing it. I think I've shared all the results and everything that's on the baseball card anyways. Let me think about whether I want to share the current version or if I can get a finished one before the episode goes out. I'll share that. But
oh yeah, there you go.
I have no problem sharing the basic design of it. I like the idea of the index card with the 3 prompts. When I read that, I thought about how I might apply that myself, and I couldn't find anything. Now, it's not to say that the practice that he has outlined here isn't valuable. I just think I've kind of done this a different way. So I've got my daily planning sheet that I fill out. Then in the morning, I write everything out with my fancy fountain pen. Thanks a lot.
Yes.
On my paper notebook. And then in the evening is when I do the gratitude and I have the prompts. I 100% believe in the power of the prompts, by the way. I definitely think this is something that you should experiment with. And if you're going to do it in a digital application, I know you like analog stuff, but Day One now has these templates that you can create, which make this super easy. It's actually even replaced the shortcut that I used to have where I would fill everything out and then it would format it into a table for me. So it's really, really easy to add your own prompts into a reusable template inside of something like Day One. And I think that the prompts get you thinking in the right direction. That's really what he's trying to do with these 3 things. So I will focus on basically that is like the highlight that we learned about in Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky. I've actually got that on my planning sheet. I've got the gratitude thing in the evening. I do think you could make an argument for doing this at the beginning of the day. He does share some findings from does happiness lead to success study, where they found 31% higher productivity, 37% higher sales, 3 times as much creativity when you show up for your day with a positive mindset. So I recognize that that's really the result that he's going for with this index card. And I think that that is very valuable if you wanted to just copy and paste this part of it for yourself. The I will let go of thing really challenged me, but I don't think, I've kind of built this into my personal retreat. And I used to be the person who answering that question would have totally made a very big difference in my day, because I would get upset about something that had happened during my workday and I wouldn't be able to sleep because I just keep thinking about it. And even if there's nothing I can do about it right now, and just knowing that I have to deal with it tomorrow, like that's the kind of thing that would eat at me. And that doesn't really happen anymore. But past Mike definitely could have benefited from this index card practice.
Sure. Yeah.
One thing that I do have from this section, by the way, in terms of an action item, is this whole idea of he calls it a contemporary confession, where you can share your unfiltered thoughts. I kind of hesitated when I read this, because I feel like if you just focus on negative feelings, that can kind of snowball. So I'm a little bit hesitant to do that, but I also understand the benefit of releasing these things and not keeping them inside. So one of the things that's challenging to me is figuring out who I can mentally release these things to. And again, not so I can just complain for hours, because that's going to have the opposite effect. But I don't really think there is anybody at the moment who I would feel completely comfortable, just unfiltered, saying, I feel like this right now. And that's kind of alarming, I guess.
Sure.
But it's something, sharing my failures here, it's something I recognize that I need to figure out a way to add that. Now, obviously, being married, your significant other is one obvious outlet for that. But also, I'm not so sure I want to share all of that stuff with my wife, because I don't want her to have to carry that. I don't want her to feel like she needs to defend me because I'm feeling vulnerable at the moment.
Right.
So I'm not 100% sure exactly what this looks like yet, but it is something I need to wrestle through.
Yeah, no, I get that. I have a tendency to mentally release to myself, which I'm not sure.
That's what journaling is, basically.
Yeah, and that's what I do nightly. So ultimately what I end up doing, and this is why I don't use prompts, I have a tendency to just write whatever is on my mind at the time. And usually that's whatever has been most difficult about the day. So you don't really want to read this because it's going to be pretty negative. So it's probably going to get burnt at some point. Not one I'll keep around. But it's one that, like, that's how I tend to do that. I don't really bring it up here because I've been doing it for quite some time. So it's not an ad. But I don't know, that could be an option. I don't know that you would need to do that with a person. Personally, I don't, and not sure I would. As you know, sometimes what I think and what comes out of my mouth is not helpful to anyone involved, no
True.
matter how I come about it.
That's the thing I'm struggling with. And he uses the idea of confession in a whole bunch of different religious practices as like an evidence of the value of this sort of thing. But I struggle with that because exactly what you just said, how does me sharing my negative stuff help anybody else? Right? I don't want to be the guy who's always bringing people down.
Right. Because I mean, like, you could share this stuff with me, but what if you're upset with me about something? Like, okay, yes, you could probably share that, but you're going to be tactful in the way you say it. You're not just going to unload.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it would be very, very difficult to do that. What if the thing you need to unload is a difficulty you have with your spouse? You don't want to share that with her because you are trying to be tactful in the way that you handle that situation.
Yep.
So I don't know that it's possible to have a single person that you could do that with. I think it might be possible to have different people that you can share different things to.
Yeah.
But trying to find a single person to do that with, I think that's a lost cause.
Sure. Yeah. I guess for me, it's just identifying anybody that fits that description.
Sure.
Like the picture I get is of the guys who go to the bar after work and they're sharing stuff over a beer. I don't drink, so that's not going to happen. But like,
you can have a cherry cola.
Who's my non-drinking drinking buddy?
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, no, I get it. Now let's go ahead and step into the next secret, and this is where he kind of shifts from dealing with the current failures to what do you move towards. Secret number 7 is find small ponds. And this is something that you can do in order to take the next step in where do you start working on the new, in that you have a much better chance of success if you find an area where you're a big fish. Use that analogy in that you don't want to be, someone who's going to get a 3.0 grade point average in the midst of a group who's all got 4.0s. Like, you don't want to be in that scenario. You want to be the 3.0 in a group of 2.0s. Like that concept is what you need to be working towards, because what it does is it ups your chances of success. As kind of a story, and I don't mean to keep pushing this course. It's just been fresh on my mind, so it's something that's come up. This is kind of what I do with OmniFocus. OmniFocus is not, it's not electric vehicle big as far as a topic. It's much smaller than that. And that's where I've kind of had my niche as far as expertise goes. So that has become a small pond that I know that I'm comfortable operating within. And I'm trying to branch out to a few other areas as well, somewhat successfully here and there. So I am working on that as well. But what you have to do is find those small ponds and then start working your way towards becoming a voice in them and shooting for success within those. This is actually a very short chapter, so he just mentions this briefly as a form of here's what you could do next.
I understand the point that he's making here, but again, I think this is something that could be correct or incorrect depending on the context. So, as an example, when I read this initially, I thought of some advice that I had been told a long time ago, that if you are the most important person in the room, if you want to keep growing, you need to change your room. Like, you got to get around people who are more successful than you are. And I do think that there is an element of truth to that. But on the other hand, he uses a very relevant example for me of when he started giving speeches, because this is something that I've wanted to do and I haven't really pursued it a ton because I know it's a ton of work and I just don't think it's a major piece of what I'm doing right now. But I do enjoy, we've talked about my Toastmasters experience. I do enjoy public speaking. So kind of in the back of my head has always been the thought of, wouldn't it be great if I could get paid to speak? And I remember as I was thinking through this a couple of years ago, I had somebody help me put together like a 1-page speaker form. And I had my some quotes, some testimonials type stuff. I had some speeches that I had done previously, so people could like pick something if they wanted something for like a corporate training sort of thing. And then examples of your work, so my book, podcast, stuff like that I had been on, and then pricing information. And I remember putting pricing on there and somebody telling me, add a 0, basically 10x everything.
Sure.
So I did, and obviously it went nowhere. So that didn't really help. And Neil's approach was different because he started at the low end of the pay scale. And when he uses the story in the book of when he started working with a service to help get him paid speaking gigs, they were asking him sort of like, what are the types of venues that you want to speak in? And he was going for the low stuff, the small stuff. And they were kind of, my impression of the story, they were kind of taken aback by that. Like they thought that was kind of weird. But I think there's a lot of value to that. I think that if you start that way, you are pretty much guaranteed to underpromise and overdeliver. And that's going to create a lot of goodwill and a lot of momentum as you grow. You'll start to develop a reputation as somebody who is really, really good, as opposed to kind of the approach that I was following unintentionally. Was this guy who has never done this before. Somebody pays him a big sum of money and they feel like, well, that was a rip. That's a quick way to derail your speaking career. So I think that finding small ponds and the whole idea of failing and then succeeding, when you can do that, when the stakes are small and you can learn those things, you can string together some successes. That's going to be a much better path forward for a lot of things that people want to do. But also just finding the places where you feel like a big fish and just hanging out there for a long time, that's not necessarily a good strategy.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I have a note here of. He never mentions of when to switch ponds or when to move to a lake or when to move to the ocean. Like he never mentions that.
But you do have to at some point.
Correct. And that piece isn't brought up in that, yes, you can find the small ponds, but don't become complacent or comfortable or content with that. That would be my argument, in that you have to be willing to grow. If you're going to continue to get better, you're going to continue to string together successes, you either have to find a different pond or a bigger one.
Yep.
In order to continue to grow there. Now, at the same time, in his defense, I think what he's getting at is, how do you get that first success?
Yep, totally.
Because I don't think he really tries to go beyond that per se, at least not here. So I think that isn't necessarily his intention with this particular chapter, but it's also not made clear. So that might be a detriment to this section, or a qualm that we have with it, but that's something that I think should be called out for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily a qualm or even a disagreement. It's just something that I thought of based on the whole context of everything that we've ever read as we're looking at this book. You know, he's telling stories and he's creating a narrative in a very specific direction, so I don't fault him for the approach that he took here at all. I don't think that his advice is wrong. I just want to bring some more context to it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Which does bring us to secret number 8, go untouchable. Easy way to summarize this, deep work. Basically what he's getting at is setting up untouchable days. You have a time period or an entire day where this is when you're going to work on your thing, and don't let anything get in the way of that. Like that's really, if I'm going to completely distill down that whole chapter into one little tiny succinct summarization, that would be it. When you read this, did you have an interest in trying this? Like, this is something that I feel like whenever I was reading about, like, I want to do an untouchable day, like, I feel like that's impossible for me because so much of my day is spent handling things that show up. I can't really do that. Does that make sense? Like, maybe I'm just trying to find an excuse.
Well, you are trying to find an excuse, but that doesn't mean that what you're doing is incorrect either. So I don't think I would have responded to this the same way as I did when I read it, had I read this a year ago, because my work situation has changed. And one of the things that we use at Blanc Media is Basecamp. We've brought up Gap books and things like Jason Fried, and it doesn't have to be crazy at work. The whole Basecamp ethos is kind of built around, you don't always have to be accessible. And that has really changed how I go about my workday. There are times when we don't communicate as a team for an entire day. And I think that I can probably schedule that fairly regularly. It doesn't mean that I can't respond though. So I need to give some thought to this, because there are going to be times when people need something from me. Usually I can see ahead and anticipate that, but I would love to try this. And even if I can't embrace it completely, I definitely won't be able to do the no cell phone, no Wi-Fi. But my version of this, as I'm thinking about it, is just I cut off every distraction from the outside world. Basically, if I'm going to write scripts for a course, for example, then I'm not checking anything. Email, Messenger, nothing. And that kind of happens already accidentally every once in a while. So that's kind of the thing that gives me hope, is maybe I can schedule this stuff into my regular day-to-day. I'm not going to schedule it 16 weeks in advance like he talks about.
That's intense.
As I sit down and think about my week, I think that there's an opportunity to say this day is going to be my untouchable day. And again, even if it's not completely untouchable, I feel like I can create the 80-20 of this pretty easily, given what I've got to work with.
For sure. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I don't know. I like the idea. It's one that it struck me as deep work through and through from the get-go. And as much as I love that concept, like that's where deep work, I feel like, strikes me more, because Cal Newport at least gave the opening to do this for a few hours or just an hour for your day. I can get on board with, and I can implement that. But an untouchable day, at least in my work week, I have no idea how that would work. I can sometimes get 3 or 5 requests before I ever get to my desk. Like that's not abnormal.
Yeah.
And most of the time expected. So trying to do something like that would mean I can't go to the office. Like that wouldn't work. You know, yesterday I was trying to do a few things at a deep work level and was going to a few places in the building and borderline hiding, but people come find you, you know, and they hunt you down, like if they need something. And to be honest, they had legitimate requests that needed me hunted down for. So I can't really get too upset with that.
So you're basically making the excuses that he lists here.
I know.
I know. But what about emergencies? But what about urgent meetings?
Yeah.
And then the third one is I really want people on my team to take untouchable days, but they have trouble disconnecting. Yep. The first two, I think, are very valid depending on your situation. But he would probably argue that that doesn't mean you can't do it. They're just going to be obstacles that you have to overcome.
Yeah. Now, you know, in this particular case, we had a funeral getting ready to go on. Like, you can't wait. Like, that's not possible. So, you know, when I've got a grieving family that's trying to put together, say, a slideshow so that they can remember the person, the deceased, like, it's inappropriate for me to say no, I'm busy, or to be unreachable. Like, that's not acceptable. That's my job. So, like, I struggle with that part. I totally get him trying to shut down my excuses. I totally get it. But I also don't know how to effectively do my job and do that at the same time. Now, I will say this. The one place where I could potentially see this being extremely helpful, and as this episode releases, I believe I can say this, there's an article coming out on the Suite Setup that Mike and I collaborated on somewhat. Mike asked me a bunch of questions, and I responded to those. And I call out something I don't think I've talked about online, but my family and I have recently started doing a Shabbat dinner, so a Sabbath dinner, on either Friday or Saturday night, depending on what's going on. And then we take an entire day of rest. And that entire day is typically Saturday because I work a lot of times on Sunday mornings. So that Saturday is usually when I'm taking a break. That I have a tendency to be very regimented about, in trying to make sure that I'm focusing on my family that day and not letting the outside world get a hold of me. And that's okay on that day. But I'm not going to be working on that day. Like, that's a rest day. That's not a get work done day. So I could maybe see that applying here somewhat, but in a different way. Like, I'm not going to be accomplishing a bunch of tasks on that day. So, I don't know. That's about as close as I can get. He does do a good job of shutting down my excuses, though.
Yep.
So, all right. That said, secret number 9, never stop. Now, when we were talking about number 5, lose more to win more, but also find small ponds, and we're referencing, like, yes, you have to be willing to move on. Like, this, I feel like, is maybe the catch here, in that he does cover that, in that, yes, you're going to have failures. Yes, you may have some successes, but don't stop. Keep stepping forward. Keep being willing to take the next step on the invisible staircase. Be willing to continue moving and pushing forward. That's what he's getting at here. I don't really have much more to say about it than that, because this is just that. Never stop. Keep going.
Yeah, one additional thing I'll call out is he mentions don't overthink things simply because you have options. And I think this is difficult for me and probably a lot of other people too, where if you are further along on your journey, once you've made the mindset shift of, I have the ability to design the type of life I want to live, you can get to the point where you're trying to keep all of these doors open. Which book was it where we talked about that? Was that Predictably Irrational? Where we try to
I believe so.
And where we keep all the options open. And he's basically saying, just because you have a bunch of options, don't overthink things. Just make a decision and go with it. Which is a good reminder to me, because I totally tend to overthink things.
Sure.
It's like, well, I could do this, or I could do that, or should I do this, or I don't want to close that door. But really just picking a course of action and then going all in with it, that's really the thing that's going to make a difference. And then also he mentions that every connection is an opportunity to learn. And I view this as, when he said that, maybe this isn't exactly the point that he was making, but I read this or interpreted this as every single person that you come in contact with, you have the ability to learn something from. It does not matter where you think you are on the totem pole and where you think they are. Even if you think that you are further along or above them, and I hate using that term, but that's really like what we do if we're honest with ourselves. We think that we're above certain people because we've achieved something. That's not really true, but that's kind of the natural perspective that we have. I don't want to look at people that way anymore. I want to, every single person I come in contact with, kind of ask myself, what can I learn from this person? Maybe there are aspects of my life where I've got some things figured out to a higher level than they do. But that doesn't mean that in a different area, they don't have more experience and can't teach me something. And I feel like I'm getting better at this, but still I probably miss a lot of opportunities to learn something just because I don't recognize them. And I want to be looking for those.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to make. I do want to call out something from a higher level. If you look through these 9 secrets, there is a progression here that I think is important. And if you look at this whole progression, it might handle some of the points we've brought up of, well, you kind of need to be willing to do X, not just this. He kind of calls it out if you look at the flow here. So something bad happens, add a ... shift the spotlight, see that failure as a step, and tell yourself a different story about it. So those are kind of 4 pieces of what happens when you have that failure. Then he kind of steps back from that to a kind of a meta level and talks about failures, lose more to win more. Just talking about that failure at a higher level of just be willing to fail so that you have time for those successes. But he also then goes into secret 6 of reveal to heal. So you've got the failure, you're working through it, trying to see it the right way, being willing to be okay with that failure, but then telling people about, whatever it is that you had that failure. So he does make a hard shift there from talking about the failure to what do you do with that failure, but then he gets into how do you move past it. So getting into 7, 8, and 9, moving past that failure and stepping into the next thing and on the next step in the invisible staircase. He gets into that and makes the point of don't stop climbing that staircase. So when we've had the complaints around, or maybe not complaints, those are hard words, but points around like, yes, you have to be willing to shift pawns, or, don't just focus on failures. He kind of calls that out to some degree when you look at the overall flow of what he has there. So I can appreciate, you can tell he put a lot of thought into what order to put these into the book. It's not just a randomized list of secrets or principles that he wants to point out. He does have the overall flow thought through, which I think is true of most books, but I really noticed it in this particular outline here.
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree.
So that said, action items, Mike, I have one. I feel like I should have more than that. Is that bad? I want to do this 2-minute morning practice, these prompts in the morning. I got to figure out how I want to do that. So much of this is just be aware of these problems. Be willing to see things in a certain way. It's all mindset stuff. So it's hard to really nail down what it is you're going to do with it when it's all in your head. Not that it's all in your head, but it's on your head.
It's true. All right, I've got 3 of them. Number 1, I mentioned, I want to ask myself, who can I mentally release to? Although you've given me food for thought with the stream of conscious writing. That's something I got away from when we talked about that with the morning pages. The Artist's Way, I think.
Right.
Maybe it's time to revisit that now that I have a fancy fountain pen.
You'll appreciate it more now.
Yeah. The second one was to share my failures. Again, I feel like this is something that I have been doing. It's not something that's going to just all of a sudden start, but it's a good reminder to keep doing that because there is value in that. And then the third one is to think about how I might implement the untouchable days, even if I don't take it all the way to the degree that Neil has. I think that I can 80-20 this, and doing so would help me create more mental space, which is a great lead into the book that we'll cover next time, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah, for sure.
So style and rating, you go first.
Yeah, this one, he tells a lot of story here, and his personal story, which is like woven through the entire book from start to finish, which is a fascinating story. And he is a very good writer in that he really pulls you into the book. I think I read this across, I think it was 3 or 4 sittings, something like that. Just because I didn't want to put it down, and I had to make sure I had time whenever I picked it up because I knew I wasn't going to want to set it down. So kudos to Neil on that. Absolutely loved the process of reading it. I do feel that this is one that just about anybody should read. I feel like we say that from time to time, but this one I really truly say that because everybody has setbacks in life, and this really shows you on a detailed level what to do about it and how to become more resilient. So greatly appreciated that. At the same time, like we do have, I had a handful of places where like, okay, yes, but, and I wanted him to call a few things out a little bit more. So it just doesn't feel like it's a 5.0 to me. So, but I do think it's a ways up there. So I'm going to put it at 4.5. It is a great read. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend it. So that's where I'm going to land.
All right. I struggle with what to rate this because it's not my cup of tea. It's not a knock against the book at all. It's the stories are great, and the effect that they have is that they make Neil more relatable, and they make you want to hear what he has to say. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And by telling the personal stories, you get the feeling that Neil is speaking directly to you and that he does care about your situation. And this is advice from a close friend that you're meeting for coffee. It's a very easy read. I think I read it in 2 days.
Nice.
It's not something that is super heavy or heady like you described it at the beginning. And that's not a bad thing. That's also kind of what I prefer. So I'm going to take that out of the equation, though, and I'm going to join you at 4.5.
Nice.
It's not something that I think completely revolutionized my life, but there's a lot of stuff in here that maybe would have had I read it a couple of years ago and I had been in a different place.
Sure.
And I think that even if you have read every productivity book out there, you'll get something out of it, and it's going to be an entertaining, quick read. It's definitely worth your time.
It's one that I would say, like, if you have read a lot of self-help productivity business books, like what we've done on Bookworm, this is a great motivator.
Yes.
There is a lot of value in that. Like, yes, you may know this stuff. Like, I can't say that there was anything here that struck me as, oh, that's revolutionary. I've never thought of that before. That'll completely change my life. No, there's not really any of that to me because of what we've been through. But it is a very good motivational book to me because there's a lot of things in here. It's like, yes, I know this, but I needed reminded about it. So that's why I like it so much.
Exactly. It doesn't need to be a revolutionary book. He references a lot of studies in here that we've unpacked in a lot greater detail in other books. So there may be absolutely nothing new in here for you, but I guarantee you that once you go through this, you will be motivated to a higher level to apply some of this stuff.
Absolutely. So that said, love the book, highly recommend it. Put it on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
Next is Margin by Richard Swenson, which was a recommendation. I think Rosemary was the first one to vote for this, but it's something that I've wanted to talk about on Bookworm for a very long time. So I was super excited when I saw it start to take off. And so this is one of the highest recommended books in the club. And I'm excited to go through this one with you next time. It's all about finding space.
Yep, that'll be a good one. And probably a good timing on that one as well. So the one after that, if you remember from a couple episodes ago, was it 3 episodes ago now? I forget, 2 or 3. We went through Super Better, and I played a game, and Awful Otter on the club won that game. So Awful Otter got to pick what the next choice that I was going to have, if you follow my weird logic there. So Awful Otter picked The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, and I think Mike's okay with that. It didn't have to scare you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Awful Otter won the game, but more importantly, Mike did not lose the game.
Yes. So you've got Margin, then following that is The Infinite Game. Do you have a Gap book this time around?
I do. I pre-ordered this a while ago when I saw Michael Hyatt was working on this. He came out with a new book not too long ago called Your World-Class Assistant. It's all about working with a VA. It's a small book similar to the one that he wrote about no-fail meetings. Have you seen that one? It's kind of like
I like these 100-page books or something.
So it's basically that size. And I haven't started it yet, but no-fail meetings was very practical, lots of lists of things, but very direct and lots of actionable advice in it. I have toyed around with the idea of hiring a VA for a very long time. I even mentioned it, was it last episode or the episode before, as something I need to revisit.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt I'm going to at some point, and I want to do it right this time. So I want to see what Michael Hyatt can teach me.
All right. Well, if you're going to learn how to do it, he's probably a good one to learn from, for sure.
Right, yeah.
I do not have a Gap book this week with a course launch and stuff. I just have not had time to go through a second book.
Excuses.
I know. But I think I'm better off in the long run for it. So I don't have a Gap book this time around, traveling and such, so not even going to attempt that. I know better. So
see, you're already adding that margin.
I am. So that said, big thanks to those of you who are listening live and joining us in the chat room. Big thanks to you guys. You help the show keep going. If you would like to join the private area and listen to these live whenever we're recording them, you can join the Bookworm Club, club.bookworm.fm, and become a member of that club, a paid member of the club. And you get some special perks. There's a custom wallpaper that Mike put together for it, which I use on everything, it seems like. Love that thing. So good job, Mike. So there's a wallpaper. You get all of Mike's MindNode files, all the notes that are there. There are a few Gap Book episode recordings that I've done from some previous Gap Books. So there's quite a bit in there. But again, the big one is you get to listen to these shows live and talk, chat with us as we're recording this. So if you haven't already, you can become a member, club.bookworm.fm/membership, and that'll get you straight to the page where you can sign up to do that.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And if you're following along, pick up Margin by Richard Swenson, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.